of course, to hear from our startups and to see all the progress that they've made. But we're also here to learn. We're here to learn about what makes a startup viable, what makes a startup grow, and how we can build these startups to build innovation for our communities. And so we're going to have a panel of distinguished guests from ecosystems and funds who really understand how to make startups work and grow. And we're going to have Lokesh Kumar kind of lead that panel segment. And I'd like to introduce Lokesh briefly. Lokesh is a tech leader and a co-founder of Urgently. He has varied experience in both hardware and software systems across multiple platforms and technologies. He spends his free time helping founders locally develop their startups. All of us here at Startups Ignite have benefited from his dedication as a mentor and advisor. Just give Lokesh a good round of applause.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Yes. So today, I don't know if all of you, when you walk around, you saw, wow, what a great weather it is for outdoor events. So nobody wants to be here, right? Friday afternoon. Right. So thank you. Thanks a lot for spending Friday afternoon that actually is meant for outdoor activities to come inside and spend time with us. And I assure you that the great panel that we have, every minute of your time you spend with them today will be rewarded with some of the great wisdom that those people have. I don't have the total, addition of how many years of experience they bring. One of them is 30, one of them is 20 plus, other one is 10 plus, and you can do the math, right? I will let them walk in and I will let them introduce and then we'll go from there. Yeah? All right. Rick Fleischer. Marco. Iman and Peter. So I'll leave my introductions of them only here. I want to hear from them what they have to say.
So my name is Iman Palavani. I am actually a 2009 George Mason graduate. Went to law school up in Boston. Started my first company about 6 months before I graduated from law school called LiveSafe. Some of you guys might be familiar with it, but it's a venture-backed company. Over the last 5 years, I think we've raised a little bit over $20 million for the business. And about 2.5 years ago, me and the founder of that business broke off to start my second venture, which is called Hungry, which is a platform that connects businesses with independent chefs in a given region. Also venture-backed. And we just recently closed the Series A, and we're off to the races. And we've also had support from Marco in both my companies.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter.
Hi everyone, I'm Peter Lundquist, and I build products at Village Capital, which is based in DC. And the products that we're building are intended to break down barriers to capital for entrepreneurs solving big societal problems.
Thank you. Marco.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Marco, thank you for the concept. Senior Investment Director for the CIT. We're a creature of the Commonwealth. We're a seed stage investor, and by way of background, started in 2003, fast forward to present. We have 250 companies in the portfolio, some of them good, and I think they're here. So, and we have life sciences, energy, software, and aerospace fund vehicle, and I was a VC before doing this and a corporate venture guy before that. So very nice to meet you all.
And Rick Fleischer.
Serial entrepreneur, done hardware, software, services, businesses. One was bootstrapped, the rest have been either angel or venture backed. I had the good fortune of being a co-founder with Lokesh in Urgently, and now a company called Manor, which is like Credit Karma, but for your house. And other than that, I've been an LP in venture funds and also done some angel investing.
Okay, so thank you all four of you for spending your Saturday afternoon with everybody here. As I mentioned before you walked in, this is a great day to be outside, so thanks a lot. Now, who wants to, tell me, or who has a guess that, why I picked this order? Anybody? Any guess?
Business life cycle, I don't know.
Business life cycle. Okay, well, that was not close. Anybody else?
So because from engineering to the business side?
Okay, I will give you the answer.
Youngest oldest. I want a second try.
You want second try, all right?
From finance to capital.
Youngest to oldest.
From startup to exit.
Who said youngest to oldest? So, what I picked was who graduated, who did his undergrad work the last. Did I pick it right?
You did. Yep, I think you did.
Okay, I went to their LinkedIn profile, by the way. That was the algorithm I applied. Pretty simple, not too much. So let me ask, all of you who are here in the audience, how many of you are current founders? More than 50%. And how many of you are thinking of starting a company?
Come on, raise your hands. Come on, you know you want to do it.
And how many of you are investors? Okay, and how many of you are here to just support your friends and your family? Wow. So founders first, family second. That's definitely a good recipe. All right, so what we will do is that we will try to keep the format of the panel discussion today more of a conversation. For each topic, I'll try to start the discussion with a question to the panelists, and I may point one or two people based on the kind of my understanding of what their background is for a given question, but all of you are very welcome to jump in and add your perspective to it. And during the conversation, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. We will try to accommodate it. At the second part of the conversation, we will have open Q&A. If you want to keep your questions to that time, that's all right as well. Okay? So all right, so let's start going. So the first thing that was on my mind was, what has helped you to get to where you are today?
Just healthy curiosity and just wanting to try different things and not having a fear of doing things, and then just researching and doing a lot of homework. Never jumping right into something without sort of understanding and owning the right to do something. I was never like looking to do something as an exercise.
I like this answer a lot better. Mine's a series of collisions, and just by way of background, I accidentally got into venture capital. It was not a deliberate step. I was hired from a major consulting firm, and my employer had gone through billions of dollars and said, surely we can do things better. And they said, study it. And I came back about a month later with my paper product and said, here we go, this is really cool. And they said, we really like that, do it. And I almost had a heart attack. I said, I don't know the first thing about investing capital. And that was the beginning of MCIU Ventures in '96. So there you go.
I'd say for me, I say this with sharing advice with everyone else, is I'd find a really, really good co-founder. So when I first started my first company, Live Safe, I partnered up with my brother, who was my arch nemesis for 20 years before. But find a good co-founder, split the equity. It's been the #1 key to success in both my ventures. Having someone else when you're down to lift you up. You don't want to work, they will, and you flip roles. I'm big on finding a good partner that'll help you get through all the struggles of the first 2 years of running a startup, which is probably the most difficult 2 years. So that's been the key to success for me for both of my businesses.
So I have a little bit different of a path. I started as a journalist and it was right around the time where the World Wide Web hit the scene, and so massive disruption of the news media industry happened almost immediately, and so I started having some experience in computer science. I started putting news sites online back in 1996. And so that really led to a love of identifying a problem and solving it, and led me into product development from there. And so that's eventually left the news media industry, wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I didn't yet know what problem I wanted to solve as an entrepreneur, and about that time, Village Capital was looking for someone to build products for entrepreneurs who did know what problems they wanted to solve. So that was a great opportunity, and I jumped at that.
That's good, thank you. So I do have one point I wanted to bring up, which, you know, I think all four of you have actually had varied experiences, you know, not just straight path like computer science, right? I noticed on Eman's profile you went to law school, it seems.
I did. Yep.
So does that help?
So for me, this is probably not the answer that I should give, but it wasn't, for me, I got a lot out of George Mason. I went to law school because the parents wanted me to go to law school. And as I was graduating law school, I talked to the dean of my law school, and he told him I came up with an idea, which turned into LiveSafe, and I said, you know, should I go work in big corporate law? And he said, you know, you're crazy. Take the opportunity, take the risk. You're only going to get, you know, a few opportunities like this in your lifetime. So I didn't practice and went straight into that, and haven't looked back since. So has it helped me? Probably. I'm probably, you know, a little bit more eloquent than I would have been if I hadn't gone. But you know, did I use, you know, law in my businesses? Personally, no. Most of the time, you know, we just hire outside counsel.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to second topic. So, you know, the DMV area, this time in startup genomics, I think it made number 18, you know, so that's a good progress. But, you know, how can we advance the startup ecosystem in DMV area? I'll start with you, Peter. You work with, you know, consortium in Virginia called Virginia is for Entrepreneurs. What is that?
Sure. So in Virginia, there's a consortium of investors, tech hubs, universities, and other organizations that are all in the business of supporting entrepreneurs in one way or another. And they wanted to really catalyze investment into Virginia and try to keep entrepreneurs within the Commonwealth, keep the talent, and get investment into those companies. And so they banded together to create a consortium called Virginia is for Entrepreneurs. It's a play off of the state slogan, Virginia is for Lovers. And so Village Capital got involved to really help that consortium level set all the different companies that were starting up in the Commonwealth, and then connect them with the right level of resource, whether that was an accelerator, an incubator, a co-working space, or resources of capital. Different kinds of investment from angel through venture. So we used our investment readiness framework, which is called Viral, to create a way to match up entrepreneurs and resources at the right time, at the right stage. And we launched that as a pilot, and we've since developed that into a platform that we call Abaca.
Sorry, one follow-up. So, you know, the framework that you're talking about, Viral and the Abaca, is that just an app that anybody can download and play with it, or how does it work?
It's a web app, so you can just go to abaca.app, and you can do that on your phone or on your desktop. And the framework that we developed is called Viral. That's Venture Investment Readiness and Awareness Levels. And it's something that we use throughout all of our investment readiness programs. We had acceleration programs with Village Capital. And one of the revolutionary ideas in those programs is that the entrepreneurs made the investment decision at the end of the program. So we needed to train entrepreneurs how to think like investors and how to evaluate where their company was on its path to scale. And so Viral resulted from that work. And we've tested it with about 1,000 entrepreneurs in 30 countries around the world and really iterated the different milestones that you need to hit to get to different levels of capital. And that was the foundation for the system that we created, the Cohort.
That's a pretty cool, by the way. If you guys, read the book that is behind it and the framework itself, something that changes the way you think about raising capital, if you guys want to take a look at that. Rick?
No, I just had a question. I was going to ask him how many companies went through, so that was helpful. And then how many of those companies have been funded and what amount of funding have they gotten so far?
Sure, so we would fund from our own fund 2 of the companies in each cohort. So there were cohorts of 12 and we would fund the top 2 based on the peer selected decision. And then we would also bring in other investors into the program. And so there's been over $400 million of investment into the alumni of the Village Capital Program.
Fantastic.
So, Marco, CIT is, somewhat of a government, fully government.
Yeah, quasi. Yeah, we're a private company, but we are taxpayer funded.
Okay. So the question, I wanted to ask was, do you think that the governments in the area do enough to further the startup ecosystem?
Well, maybe I should ask, are there any report or government officials in the room? It's an interesting question, and as you might imagine, there's probably a lot of complexity to it. The way there are a multitude of tools that people have at their disposal on the funding side, so just using CIT as one model. There's a part of the organization that has a grant-giving mechanism, and that has its place for a very early stage innovation. There's a standing call for applicants each year, comes from the governor's office. CIT impanels a body and makes small 50K grants for Virginia-based entrepreneurs and academics and scientists. Then there's a side of the house that I'm on, that's the investment team. The tools that we work with are equity capital exclusively. We look and quack just like any other investor, with one difference. We start off with minimum eligibility. You have to be a Virginia-based company, but after you kind of peel that off, we deliberately drive investment in companies that we think will attract co-investment. So we're a relatively small fund vehicle, and to answer your question about do government officials do enough? I mean, there's an open question about what is the mechanism of contribution, right? Is it grant capital? Is it equity? Is it know-how? Is it creating a regulatory framework, for instance, that makes it easy? Is it platforms, for example, that are accessible? I don't think that there's a single silver bullet answer. I will say that in our world, we deal with a very advanced ecosystem in Northern Virginia, but we also go to the other extreme. We deal, as part of our mandate, we look at deal flow all over the Commonwealth. So if you were to look at our energy portfolio, for example, it is a byproduct of where if you look at sort of a measle chart of the state, we have energy investment companies all over the place. If you look at software, guess where they are? They're concentrated where per capita is, as you might imagine. So it's not that we deliberately choose geography in our decision making, but that's just sort of the business physics of deal flow. And we look at about 700 deals a year, make roughly 15 to 20 investments. I haven't answered your question really crisply, except to say, I don't think there's it's a complex question that almost requires the subject of a workshop to answer it. We have a handful of tools at our disposal to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. So Rick, the question for you. You have been in the area for more than 30 years, long time.
You got this on the panel, if I recall.
Probably.
By the way, I have no intention of making you feel old. Someone said I picked my age, that was not the intention. So, how has the funding scene changed in the area over the years?
There are a lot more angels locally than there were. There still needs to be a lot more, but there is a lot more angel capital locally. There are more outside funds that look at our area as a place to get value. There are less local funds. We didn't have a lot of venture funds, and now there are even less. And the funds that are still alive barely won't be able to raise new funds. You really have to, if you're raising big money, go outside the area after CIT, which has been a great supporter of a couple of the companies I've been involved in. yeah, I would just say a lot more angels. There's a great deal of wealth here, and it's just now becoming vogue or known that it is an asset class that they might want to have a small piece of, depending on their network.
So if I heard correctly, you said that there are a lot less funds in the area now.
Correct.
Is
Traditional venture funds, yes.
And why is that?
Performance, I mean, it's really a performance game. If you don't have an IRR, if your return for your investors isn't strong, there's no way you're going to be able to raise another fund. It's totally a performance game.
So the companies that are, new founders here that are pre-seed, I mean, what do you think they should do? Where should they go first?
It depends on how much money they need. So, first and foremost, as a young company, you should build your product. If you're thinking, I'm going to raise money to build my product, that doesn't happen. You got to find a way to build your product, and you've got to get some early traction and people around your project, whether it's people that, when you're finished and out of beta, say they'll trial it, whether, a soft commit like that or an actual customer, and demonstrate that there is product market fit even at an early stage. And that's certainly true in tech and bio, stuff like that's not possible. But in traditional tech, the stuff I do, you got to have proof. You've got to struggle, and you've got to have a product and some early proof. So that helps. And then from there, you've got to pitch people that make sense. So if you do have early traction, CIT, which is very scrutinous, if you do get money from CIT, it's actually helpful. People will say, wow, CIT looked at it and they said that they would put some money in. That's actually a good sign. But a lot of people, when they're first-time entrepreneurs or young entrepreneurs, they think, oh, I just met somebody who has some money, I'll ask them for a check. And that's really not wise. It's like anything else. You really need to do the homework and say, okay, I have a two-sided marketplace. Who's invested in two-sided marketplaces? Or who was an executive in a two-sided marketplace? Or I'm doing something in the hospitality space. Who are local executives that like hospitality stuff, whether they're an executive at a hospitality company or whether they're a developer of hotels or whatever, who makes sense? It's got to be germane. If it's not germane and you're just picking someone because they have money, it's usually not going to work out. So just be super efficient. Just like you're efficient at using your money when you don't have much, be efficient with your time. It's finite.
So, Iman, you raised money for two of the companies you mentioned, right?
Yes.
How did you go about it?
I'll talk about the last one just because it's more recent. For both the companies that I did fundraising for, the first check that I got for both of them was from my dad. I'd encourage everyone to get money from your parents. One, they'll write you a check, but
even after they have put you through the college?
even after they put me through college, even after the first company grew and was successful, first check I got again, the second time around was from my dad. One, it allows you to just practice your pitch, and usually parents are super skeptical of what you're going to do with their money, so navigating that was awesome. But more so, once you take in that money, you're going to do everything you can to protect it. So once we originally raised a bizarrely large seed round. We raised a $4 million seed round for Hungary. We also got support from CIT, which will make you get your stuff together because they're going to make you go through the motions that you have to for bigger folks, which helps us just get all your paperwork together, your projections, your forecasts, all the stuff that you need to. And then we, every business that you start, get sales quickly, as fast as you possibly can. You got to get to revenue because the moment you get to revenue, all of the funding doors open up really, really quickly. So we took in the seed capital and did everything we could to get revenue through the door. And we just recently closed an A round of about $8+ million. And that's all because of the revenue that we were able to generate, and the business, was able to grow and get momentum. I network through from one investor to another, so just a rule that I have is if I meet someone, I make sure to get connected with someone in that person's network. So I just know a lot of people just from talking with a lot of different people, and everybody knows somebody who can write big checks. It's just given. So you sometimes have to dig in deeper, but you can always find people, they'll connect you to a venture fund will connect you to somebody who's in the space, finding, an expert that's in your industry. So even my second time around, I had already raised all this money before. The second time around, I barely used any of the first-time investors. So started from scratch again, and it's a grind. You just network and you talk to different people, and I'm a big proponent of sharing your idea with everybody that you possibly can. I met Jay-Z and Beyonce's personal chef on a train to New York one day. He was sitting next to me and I was just telling him about this food idea that I had. Fast forward 2 years later, Jay-Z and Beyonce put in $1 million in business. I just tell everyone about the businesses that I'm going to start or that I've started to see, A, I get their opinion, but B, try and source different networks and connections into my own and continue to grow and continue to grow. So that's how we go through.
You have Usher in there too, right?
So once you get one of them, then they all start coming into the rest of that as well.
It's like the coolest. I gotta sit in one of these board meetings.
Two great nuggets, more than two great nuggets, but two great nuggets I would say to take away from that are, if you meet with someone, whether they're giving you money or not, ask them, who do you think might find this interesting? That's great advice that you gave. The other, the other advice, if you take money from your family, like, you're not going to lose. And when other investors see that you have family around it, like, sometimes they say, oh, I don't want to see family money, I want it all to be germane. But they know that once you have family money, you will not let that die. You do not want Thanksgiving to be awkward.
If I could add to that last point, there are entrepreneurs who don't have the luxury of having family members that can write a check. And so one of the things that is starting to evolve is other kinds of capital at that really early stage. And for example, there's a company called Kiva that crowdsources capital to capitalize their fund, and then they make no-interest loans in small amounts. It's sort of microfinancing, so that if you're starting a company and you don't have just that initial friends and family access that you need to start a company, there are alternatives that are starting to arise. And the second thing I wanted to build on from what Iman said was that he mentioned in his first response about a strong co-founder. Before you get to revenue, what any investor will look at is your team. And so it's very important to have at least one other founder with a differentiated skill set, and that both of you are really locked in solving the same problem and together make a really strong team.
So that's a good segue into my next topic, which is how do you measure the readiness of a startup for investment? I'll go to CIT first because that's most scrutinous, I heard.
Yeah, well, so we don't measure so much as meeting people where they're at. So we see a multitude of entrepreneurs. So by virtue of the aperture we deal with, and to Rick's earlier point, there's a real capital gap in this region. And so there's an added hardship, I think, for entrepreneurs to be exceptionally resourceful. But to answer your question, we have a series of fund vehicles that try to map approximately to where we think the spectrum of entrepreneurs are. So for example, just to give you a really raw piece, we look at translational research at a university in our life sciences fund. We do medical devices and therapeutics, and those, I mean, if you want to talk about being with a partner for a long period of time, so this is a true statement. Some of you may know venture capital funds are 10 years long. Well, life sciences have option years on top of that. And guess where the angels live? Before that. So when you are in a life sciences deal, you are in some of these things for more than 10 years, usually 15. We have a cancer deal from Charlottesville that here we are, year 15, extraordinary results, but it is a slow slog going through the clinical process. So we have kind of the seed stage for tech sorts of investments. We have a vehicle that's called Virginia Founders Fund, which is, more to Peter's point, we know that we're talking about the red meat eating side of the world, there's also the omnivores, the herbivores, right? There's the impact investment community. And there are certain kinds of entrepreneurs who are in geographically disadvantaged areas. There's just no two ways about it. The further you get away from a capital center, the more of a disadvantage you are. we've created Virginia Founders Fund to access, to create an on-ramp for those kind of entrepreneurs. It's a massive risk on our part, but what we're saying is, hey, we know the capital markets are failing in certain areas. We know it's failing for women, minorities, veterans, far away. This vehicle is designed to access those sorts of entrepreneurs, but we're still looking for the same fundamental pieces, which is, hey, we still are looking for this high growth, high expectation company that our panelists have alluded to. We're looking for the potential for an exceptionally large market, the ability for an entrepreneur to build a team around himself and others, or self brothers, it could be. We're looking for some sort of highly impactful value proposition. I was just talking to one of the colleagues beforehand about blue ocean versus red ocean strategies. You guys have probably heard about that. If not, I encourage you to get familiar with it. But we see no shortage of companies that get into very crowded spaces, and that's kind of a clever way of reframing, competitive landscape. So we look at entrepreneurs through a variety of different lenses, and then last but not least, we have, and Rick, and I think you guys have been through this too, a professional investment committee. So for our life sciences fund, our energy fund, our software fund, and the aerospace fund, there's a point where the companies have really hit a critical mass, and that's typically when the companies reach some sort of early commercialization stage. And at that point, we have impaneled bodies of, you've been in that room, you guys have been in the room, these are VCs in the room, these are exited entrepreneurs in these sectors, and they help us look at companies because we are fiduciaries. We want to know on behalf of the Commonwealth, hey, is this company look like that? Because at the end of the day, it's a subjective probability. In our view at least, we try to create these wide nets that capture where people are. But we are, at the end of the day, still a seed stage investor.
Okay, so you mentioned that some of it is still subjective at the end, and Viral tries to make it a little more objective, right, by putting, entrepreneurs into the play, and it has, like a sort of an axis of, yeah.
You won't be able to read this.
Yeah. But there are columns, and each column actually has something, a meaning to it, right? Could you give us some of those as to that are very critical if you want to ever be successful with this one?
Sure, and by the way, I have copies of this after, so if anyone wants a copy of this framework, just come see me. A lot, you talked about a lot of different funding vehicles at different stages, and it can be very confusing where to start, especially if you're very early stage. And so we created this framework to help companies from level 1, which is a founding team with an idea, all the way up to level 9, which is a large successful company that's ready for some kind of exit event, an IPO, an acquisition, and so forth. And in the columns, you have the different business categories that an investor is interested in. And there's 8 of those. Team being the first one, so who's on your team. The second one is problem and vision, so what problem are you solving and what's your vision to solve it. The third is your value proposition. The fourth is product. Fifth is market. Sixth is business model. Seventh is scale. So what scaling strategy are you following? Is it going to be a slow, sustainable kind of scaling strategy, or is it the hockey stick, hyper growth kind of strategy? And that informs whether you ever need to get venture, for example, which does demand a very fast rate of growth. And then the last column is exit or investor exit. So really understanding that if you're going to take investment from an investor, they want to know how they're going to get paid back, how they're going to get their money back and get a multiple on that. And so it helps you think through what it takes to how to respond to an investor who asks you, okay, when do I get my money back? It helps you think through those kinds of things. So each of these boxes on here is a milestone that you would achieve, and you can quickly benchmark where you are now and then prioritize where you need to go next. So that's the idea, and on the right is all the different funding sources and types of capital that you might approach. I'm curious, how many businesses do you think get some kind of capital financing to run? Do you think it's more than half? Okay. It's only 17% of companies ever get any kind of funding, and venture funding is only 0.5% of companies. So there's about 83% of companies that never get any kind of financing, and that's the
the group that we're now focused on. How do we deploy more capital to more companies?
All right, so let's switch to audience questions.
Really quickly, before we go to audience questions, everybody who has water bottles, we should not have any water in the room. So we're gonna have someone from Aventa come around. Fahima, you'll see her come around and collect your water bottles. So please kind of make those accessible for us. I see a question.
How you doing? Actually, I have a real easy, quick question. The paper that you just described, is that accessible? How do we get a copy?
I have copies, but also you can go onto the app that I mentioned, Advocate.app, and you can benchmark your company right on the screen, and then it'll help you connect with resources and investments.
Awesome. I see another question.
Before you ask a question, could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Mehdi, and I'm here to support Freshta. She has speech today. So my question is about the networking. Iman touched a little bit on that, on networking. What are the other networking techniques or tips you suggest?
Rick?
Well, there are different events in town where you can meet people. If you're just trying to network to find investors, a lot of investors don't go to events. So, you know, there are some big events in town. I won't throw any event under the bus, but having been an experienced entrepreneur, I can walk in the room and I can see that there are 3 investors. There are a couple hundred people. And so you can waste your time walking around meeting people and maybe not even meet one of these 3 people. So it'd be wise to look at companies that are similar to your company or in the same space. Look at them on Crunchbase, see who put money in. Look on AngelList, if there's any knowledge of who put money in on AngelList. And see if you can create some connectivity there. Write down who they were. Look on LinkedIn, are you connected with any? Who can connect you to those people? It's just homework, it's a grind. You can go to networking events, they're all over town, but the true investors in there are sparse, and sometimes on a panel you might meet a principal or a sorcerer, not an actual partner at the fund. So you just have to be very deliberate, but figure out who's like you, and then you can go, who likes stuff that looks like me or smells like me, tastes like me, whatever, and hunt down those people and see how you're connected. That's what I did. Even still today.
I would build on Rick's comment that I've seen most success with strong links versus weak links, meaning, for example, when we get approached for capital, it's often helpful to have a referral or some context. We still look at everyone because we are this kind of quasi-public animal. But when, you know, for example, the gentleman at the panel here source deals to me, I have some context, and they will tell me, hey, as this entrepreneur, in fact, I have one that just came in this morning. I know this particular individual, nice kid, a lot of potential, terrible idea. We gave him some feedback, he's pivoting. But you know what, I have some context there. And my suggestion is strong links, and the other is, you know, again, I'm a firm believer in, you know, to Rick's point, I meant to your point as well, which is cultivate a relationship. And if you cultivate a relationship beforehand, so imagine, put yourself on the other side of the table where you're being asked for capital, and in my case, I'm a fiduciary, right?
Yeah.
And it's advantaged, in my view, to have cultivated a relationship or have knowledge of or have done your homework with the other side of the table. So it increases the likelihood that you're going to go from that proverbial top of the funnel.
On that, that's a really strong point. If at a more mature fund, like maybe you're not even ready for this more mature fund, but you know this person is focused on your area. So let's say you have a 2-sided marketplace in this fund does marketplaces. Reach out to her or him and say, hey, I see that you're the partner on that deal. We're doing something that could either be a channel partner for them or we're tangential to them. Do you have 15 minutes for an introductory call? And then every once in a while, quarterly, update them on your progress. And then they'll be like, wow, this entrepreneur, this lady, this gentleman are really execution oriented. And you're updating them quarterly. And then when you are hat in hand, you're more likely to get an audience and their interest because they've been tracking you for a while. To think that you go to a venture fund and say, I want $1 million or 5 million or 8 million, and they just bring out their checkbook, it's a fairy tale. It may have happened, but it's not common.
Not as professional.
We've got another question.
Yes, my name is Sale. I'm here with Brandon Residential. Peter mentioned how very few companies get funded either through venture capital or, so outside of venture capital and family, what are the other sources of funding that make it that 17%?
Sure. So one of the most common sources of funding is actually personal credit or business credit, and it's, I believe, like of the companies that are funded, it makes up like 16%. So a lot of people put things on their credit card or get a business credit card on credit for doing that. But there are new sources of funding starting to come out. The Kauffman Foundation recently released a report, which I would recommend going and downloading. It's on their website, and it's called Evolving Capital. And it lays out all of the different statistics on the different kinds of financing that entrepreneurs use and where it's heading. So there are new investment vehicles, everything from revenue share to other kinds of financing that enable you to get the right amount of financing at the right time. So I encourage you.
I have a follow-up, and I probably ask Iman. When you raise money from your own capital, your own money, or from your parents, do you also put them on the note?
Yes. Yep.
So even if you put your own money?
Not my own. My parents, yes. They're on the cap table just like everyone else is. For my own, I think that's just a part of being an entrepreneur is if you're not willing to put in your own money, sometimes a lot, it's hard. How do you ask someone else to put in money if you haven't put in your own? Now, if you don't have capital, different story, but I put in a lot of money in the first business of my own. Even in the second business, I did the same thing. Again, it forces you to protect the capital. As an outside investor, if I hear someone else has put their own money in their own business, they're probably going to protect my capital the same as their own. So it's rare to find a business where the entrepreneur or the founder hasn't put in wads of their own cash in it to get it going. You should, my personal experience has been in both companies. We had to personally finance and fund it for over a year on both of them. And again, in the second one, I have all these unfair advantages, right? All these investors that are willing to put money in just because the first one's successful, but I didn't because you want to be hungry as you're doing this. You want to force yourself to be backed into a corner and have those stressful moments because a lot of good stuff comes out of it. You start to meet a lot of people, you get out into the world, you're trying to constantly attract more talent. Real quick to the previous question, one way that I would network, a different way that I would network was I would give away a big chunk of the business to a mentor that I wanted involved in the business. Somebody who knows more than me, who's smarter than me, who has access to capital, who has a bigger network than me. In my first business, I gave 30% of the business away to the first person that I thought could propel us and get us to the next level, and it worked. Company's, $75 million business, and we tapped into his network and his contacts for the first, 3 years. Jeff, by the way. And we did the same similar situation in the second business. So find people who you want to bring into your company and don't be afraid to give away equity to get them on board and get them excited. And that little bit of equity that you give away, or even a lot, tomorrow, 2 years down the line, it's going to be worth so much more if your business, survives and thrives and you keep the thing growing.
And that's a very important point because if you have 100% of equity and there is a zero value on it, then your actual value is zero. give some, you might actually go too far.
Thank you. We have another question.
Thank you. I'm Marius. I'm co-founder of Pediametrics and supporter here of Fereshte, who's going to pitch in a moment and who's a superwoman behind our company. First, thank you, Lokesh, for this very interesting panel, and I appreciate everyone's thoughts. I learned a lot from listening to you. So my question comes again to some resources in the DMV area. And one of the resources that we need in a young company is talent. And we talked about some of the challenges that we have here, that there is a lot of talent in the area, there's a lot of funding, but still there are barriers finding some of this. So how do you suggest we find some of the best resources and pools for talent in personnel and resources to bring to the company?
So, being older and having done 9 startups, a lot of times I know people for certain things. So it sounds creepy, but I collect people. And so like I'll be, if I have a problem, I'll go, I know who would be good for this. And I'll reach out to her or him and say, hey, do you have time and availability? And if not, do you recommend something? Just like the investor question. And if someone refers somebody, then it's super solid. So I just have the advantage of having been in it for a while. There are also, if you need programmers, there are Java groups, there are, any sort of programming language or tech group, there are groups that meet, and you can go to those events and meet people. There are other pitch events where you'll see people pitch and you'll go, wow, that person seems really sharp, but not to be critical, that idea is not going to work. And in multiple startups, I've met people that were running other startups and have said, that I don't think that's going to work out. Why don't you come, sort of Huck Finn, why don't you come whitewash fences with me? And that seems to work as well. So it's not necessarily the nicest way, but you can find talent in other companies that are probably not going to succeed.
I'm going to sound like Debbie Downer here right now. The best recruiting environments are down markets. And right now we have a pretty white hot market. And we also have a brand new neighbor called Amazon that's competing for talent. And I'm not saying these are necessarily negative things, but as a venture investor, I've had at least most of my success, not on the front end on momentum, but on the other end of that roller coaster. I don't know when peaks happen, but I know when valleys do. And when valleys happen, you have a real kind of flight back to reasonable valuation. You have people who are really passionate, who are truly passionate about being entrepreneurs, stick with it. And I'm not, please don't interpret what I'm saying as in any way being critical. I'm for entrepreneurship through the entire life cycle phase. But there's something that I've found about being able to find people in kind of very tough environments where they build really they have to make gritty decisions. They find really interesting co-founders. They bring in kind of the remaining funding sources. There's kind of a grittiness that you have to that. So one of my best pops happened in 2003. So after the whole dot-com thing went kaput, that's when I started, and the same thing happened in 2009, 2010, we started having some successes. So my point is, I'm not saying, hey, wait for the next bubble to burst, and I'm not saying that, but at a macro level, I am suggesting that, back to the strong link concept, I think that's also true for the nature of entrepreneurs and co-founders. And there's also another angle to your question, which is, am I recruiting a founder, or am I recruiting, to your point, what you were talking about a little earlier, building up the staff when you've really been capitalized and you're actually in recruiter mode. It's kind of very two different things, I think. You're recruiting a partner in marriage here with a founder, right? It's a different metaphor, right? But it's a different level of seriousness for that than bringing a third-party talent.
Next question.
Thank you guys. These are such good questions, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible. But rest assured that if there are any other questions, we will be sure to connect you with our panelists after the show. Right here, another question?
Hello, I'm Simeon, and I lived in the DMV area all my life, Virginia, and now Prince George's County. But my question kind of revolves around, it's kind of a simple question, it's just more so, what is the major problem that major funding solves? Like, why is it so sought after? Because, yes, it helps you grow, but what is the major push for accumulating a lot of money for your startup?
Okay, so I guess we can rephrase it in some way also, that why go for funding?
Well, glad to start up with it. I think there's a kernel to your question. I spend a lot of my days counseling people, entrepreneurs, out of fundraising. And you may sound, I'm going to sound like David Downer all over again. There are a lot of entrepreneurs who, in my view, might be better served back to the fundraising question. There's other methods. There's bootstrapping. Quite frankly, it's more just other methods. There's investor obligations, there's reporting requirements, there's complexity, there's obligation. There's a certain class of companies that's perfectly appropriate for because it's capital intensive, you have to raise capital. But I've also seen a class of companies, and I think they're called gazelles. Believe it or not, at one point in time, I don't know if this is true, SBA tracks gazelles, but I think it was the Norfolk area at one point in time had the highest concentration of these bootstrapped companies that had reached a sort of $10 million revenue threshold over a 10, 20, 30-year period. They did it without capital. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but there's certain kind of companies that have that kind of blueprint. There are other companies that are insanely profitable and only need 3 or 4 engineers, scientists, and they make perfectly fine companies, and they don't take outside capital. I'm not trying to unsell the need for capital. I'm simply saying that there is a decision space, which is this the kind of company that I'm building that really requires it? And then if the answer is yes, then we get into these other questions about bringing angels and VCs, et cetera. So I don't know if I answered the intent of your question, but I think I get approached by people who think they need to raise $1 million. When I say, hey man, you know what, I don't think so. I think if you try bootstrapping this, because A, you've got the kind of business I think that is more conducive to that.
Yes, some are more lifestyle businesses where you should bootstrap it, and because it's only going to ever get so big. If you have a business that has promise that could be national or global and needs that kind of infrastructure, and you see a window of opportunity and you want to be first and do a land grab, you need capital. It's just that simple. To have the staff and have offices in a bunch of different places, but if you don't, if your opportunity is more regional, and there's no sense of urgency around blowing it out, then don't get the capital. There's no reason to take money out of your wallet. You need to have good habits when you're a young company, because a lot of early capital is very expensive, and so you still need to treat it like it's coming out of your wallet. So like if you sold X amount of equity, and you're thinking, should I buy lunch for everybody, or should I go on to see, should I have a business class trip, or, you know, versus coach? I mean, that's all money coming out of your wallet. So when you take that early money, you have to still be prudent with it. So sometimes the early money can create bad habits, and so not every company needs it. It's just about scale.
Thank you guys. We have time for one more quick question and some brief answers.
Hello everyone, Valerie Fremont. I'm one of the mentors of this cohort, and we've been talking a lot about how do you get started, what happens at the beginning. I was wondering if you had any advice about exit strategy, thinking about where you're going and how you're going there.
So I hear 2 questions there. The first one is how you get started. And for me, that's always going through what I call a discovery period. I have an idea, and I meet with a bunch of people. And I've had ideas where I've met with 4 people, and they said, oh my God, that's brilliant, it's fantastic. Then you meet with one more person, and they're like, oh, that's a feature of something else. Have you seen this? Have you seen that? I'm like, I'm not going to start a company over a feature. So the discovery period, the homework, it's putting in the work early so you make sure you're not just doing adult daycare and keeping yourself busy, but that there's a real opportunity. So homework first. And then as far as exits, just look at the ecosystem, like the great company that Lokesh and I started urgently. You know, we initially were very broad, and then once we got focused just on roadside assistance, we're stealing share from incumbents. So you wonder, like, hey, we're crushing these big people, and they're pissed. And like, are they going to take us out just to get rid of us? Or, hey, we're doing something so much better for their customer base. Is one of their customers going to want it uniquely? I mean, so just, it comes about just naturally as far as the exit. But once you start to get value, you think, maybe my investors have been in for a long time. How do I get liquid? Do I let them sell their shares on the secondary and I keep running the business? Or do I have an exit by selling to somebody? I mean, good companies that are growing, you know, there's a cliche, you know, good companies get bought, they don't get sold. And so sometimes that's true, but other times maybe you're low on capital, you don't want to raise another round of funding, maybe you get a banker if somebody said, hey, we're interested in buying your company. I've been in those situations too. And you can get the pulse of the industry through this objective third party, asking people, hey, this company has had outside interest and they're strategic to you, would you be interested? So a couple different answers.
I had an entrepreneur tell me after he quit his entrepreneurial job that he was in a pre-IPO startup in a prior life. I thought that was hilarious. There was never an IPO there. But I think I'm gonna just add a couple things to Rick's comment and be interested what the other panelists have to say. But to me, Rick hit the nail on it. We were talking about this beforehand. There's now a name for customer discovery, right? We've been looking at this for 20 years. My expectation is that if someone's going to be asking for capital, this is not true necessarily in life sciences, where we're talking about therapeutic drug discovery, but we're talking about software. I want to see evidence, and I think investors want to see proof. To your point, they want to see proof that the customer will care. And if the customer doesn't care, why should we care? And so we're looking for evidence, and it doesn't have to be a whole lot of revenue, but we want to see an argument cultivated on the initial part. On the exit piece, I'm an evidence-driven person, and despite what I was saying about subjective probabilities, on exits, I don't know that there's any evidence to support that unicorns are knowable. If somebody in the room can provide me with a shred of evidence to say that is a knowable endeavor, I'll be the first to I'll write you a check. But I don't think there's any evidence to support it. But what I do believe is there are classes of entrepreneurs who have created an argument, research, that says, hey, here are some, the most interesting investor conversations I have about exits are the ones that not necessarily the entrepreneur starts advocating, hey, I think I'm going to exit the company, A, Y, A, B, and C, but the investor starts saying, I can actually see that scenario, and that entrepreneur has actually cultivated an argument for some other pieces that I had not thought about. They put some pictures in my head about, hey, I didn't have this idea, this is interesting. So we look at the same data places that other people look like at PitchBooks and CB Insights and Crunchbase, and we're trying to get a picture of what the market looks like. But at the end of the day, we're looking at kind of a, I think Peter had said it best, we're looking at this amalgamation of, entrepreneur, market size, the thing, the readiness of the market, and looking for this question of, is this a strong proposition here now? And an entrepreneur just yesterday say, I've got $1 billion market, it's dominated by Verizon. And I said, great, how are you going to get Verizon out of the way? It's $1 billion market, but if it's not accessible, it's a meaningless argument. So what's my point? I believe, my big thing at least, and I think investors, I don't want to speak for all investors, but we look at evidence, some proof. It doesn't have to be hard, it can be qualitative evidence that there's a market there, and I think investors will resonate with that.
So we'll go to both of you as well. That will be our last topic. Let's go to you.
I just have a really brief answer to your question about if you're just starting out, really, all you really need to do for exit is just think about what is it, and then also think about it as you start to grow and as you start to move up the capital stack. That's when you need to start being aware of exit, and really exit is for the investor to become liquid. It's not the entrepreneur, but the entrepreneur needs to understand how they're going to get the investor's money back if they seek investment. So I think when you're just starting, it's really just understanding what is an exit and then what eventually would lead to liquidity for an investor if you're going to take money.
And Emma.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what originally Rick said. The exit opportunity will materialize if I'm a very sales-driven founder, so everything I say has an angle of like, get the revenue, find the revenue, get the revenue. To the question earlier of why do people want to fundraise so much? Part of the reason is because it's cool today. Shark Tank has made it cool. Everyone wants to go fundraise, but it sucks. It's hard. You're not going to get capital all the time. But the best way to get capital is figure out what your product is and get out there and sell it. Just start to drive in the revenue early on. The investors will come to you when you have revenue. The exit opportunities will materialize when your company is just driving in cash through the door because you're selling whatever your product is. So I very much would focus on whatever it is that you're trying to do, figure out what the sales angle is, get out there and sell your product as much as you can, as hard as you can, and you won't need as much funding or you'll eliminate the need for funding, and then the exit opportunities they'll fly at you when you're a company that's doing really well on the revenue side. So revenue in my book is king all the time.
Let's have a wild round of applause for this amazing panel.